Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and evening to you all. And thanks for joining the first State of Investment Ecosystem webinar. We have a very special guest today, Lutfi Siddiqui, Special Envoy of Honorable Chief Advisor. Thank you, Lutfi, for joining. So maybe before we jump into the actual webinar, can I ask you to say a quick few words to the attendees? Thank you.
Thank you, Ashik, and congratulations on this initiative of outreach, openness, and engagement, and all the best for the series. And thank you for welcoming me to the very first. Good afternoon, everyone else. Good morning to those out in the West. I just returned from the US. I was at Washington, D.C. at the World Bank IMF annual meetings and several other meetings on the sidelines of that, with our head of delegation, Dr. Saliuddin Ahmed, and also the Bangladesh Bank Governor, Dr. Hassan Mansour. Two distinguished, exceptional professionals who command a lot of respect, confidence, and credibility. And that's visible in any meeting, in any room that we went into. Respect and credibility, as you know, is hugely important on the international scene. And we have that at the highest level, in the highest order, now Chief Advisor. As you would have seen at the UN General Assembly or the recent visit by the Malaysian Prime Minister to Dhaka, our Chief Advisor has an effortless and seemingly tireless ability to connect. And that opens up an enormous amount of goodwill and diplomatic space that frankly transcends our national brand. So for those of us engaged in economic diplomacy, to all of you, in fact, I would say that it's a tremendous asset that we must capitalize on. Here at home, I just thought I'd make a couple of observations before we get going. It's just under 2 months for me in my seat. My first observation is that I've never, in all the jobs and roles that I've had around the world, I've never felt as much respect for my colleagues or co-workers, each of the advisors and many others, that I feel in this role. Each one of them not only just bring personal accomplishments, but also unimpeachable personal integrity to their job. And it's easy to forget how important that is in the context that we're in right now. They also have a willingness to learn and course correct if required, and a total lack of silo mentality, which means that people like me, with their support, can travel visa-free across the ministries when required and get things done. The second observation I would make is that I very quickly developed an appreciation for the baseline that existed when the interim government assumed responsibility. Firstly, it came at huge and tragic human cost, an enormous sacrifice of lives and life-changing injuries. And that vests in us our sense of duty every single day. From an economics and governance point of view, also sobering to look at the baseline. There had been a prolonged decline in macro variables, drop in reserves, non-payment of obligations, persistent inflation, rating downgrades, the drop in the currency value without a commensurate recovery in exports, and of course, imbalances in the banking sector, to put it euphemistically. So the baseline was not a clean slate, it was a downtrend, and the macro challenge was and is to arrest a gathering steep decline, stabilize it, and hopefully turn it around over time.
Good Luck Pen's soft oil-based ink তাই নিখুঁত লেখার আত্মবিশ্বাস
Good Luck Pen. Make your luck.
So appreciating the baseline and the counterfactual is important, whether it's about the economy or, frankly, the law and order situation. Having said that, though, I think zooming out and looking ahead, looking forward, it's very exciting to imagine the possibilities that are there ahead of us right now. Having been a global investment banker for many years, the phrase structural reforms, I'm very familiar with that. It has been used repeatedly as a key ask by investors from investment destinations in developing countries. And we have today an almost perfect alignment between the domestic reforms agenda of the interim government and the components of those structural reforms. The same factors of structural reforms when it comes to governance apply equally to the factors of structural reforms for investments. As you know, the government has stood up these commissions, the multiple reform commissions, looking at a different dimension: police reforms, public administration, judicial reforms, including cost-cutting themes, gender issues, worker rights. And these should simultaneously help design structural changes at a systemic level. But even as these structural changes take effect in the background, we must jump in and make tactical changes, block and tackle, remove roadblocks, redress issues as we encounter them in the day-to-day, every day. We're not sitting on our hands waiting for big reforms. We're also not expending any emotional energy lamenting or complaining about this or that, which is far from satisfactory right now. That is a given. The fact that we have reform commissions for these areas suggests that there are large parts that are broken right now. But it's really the direction of travel that excites me. I'm going to stop now and come back to, and hopefully come back for Q&A later. But let me finish by saying that there are two overriding principles that I believe we must follow in our reforms journey and as we improve our operating climate. One is due process, and the other is customer journey. We must ensure that due process in decision-making is followed so that even when I do not agree with a specific decision, I have confidence in the fairness of that process. And secondly, every process must put the customer at its center so that the care is taken to make that customer journey better. And that customer can be a citizen in general, or it can be an investor in a specific context. So back to you, Ashik, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that's a very nice lead into my presentation. So, and I promise you, it's not going to be a 50-slide presentation, just like what we have had seen before. But as you probably know, I'm 3 weeks into this job, and I'm ever so thankful for all the staff members, just like he is, the members of Bangladesh Investment Development Authority, Economic Zone Authority, the wider government machinery for the support I had received. I can confirm that having a demanding Nobel Prize winning head of state boss is not an easy task. But let's jump into the presentation. Let me share my screen.
Good luck পেনের সফট অয়েল বেসড ইঙ্ক দেয় নিখুঁত লেখার আত্মবিশ্বাস
Good luck pen. Make your luck.
And before I jump into the slides, one more thing I must admit, it has been absolutely heartwarming to receive calls from so many of you, resident and non-resident across the world, who have offered to help and make a difference. So thank you to you all. The purpose, let's start with the purpose of this meeting. And the idea behind this is really to create a platform where we can all interact and have a common dialogue. We can share our ambitions, tackle misinformation. At the same time, you can ask tough questions to us so that we remain accountable to you. This will happen on a regular basis. We will have guests coming in, the likes of Lutfibhai this time, hopefully the likes of the Governor, Central Bank next time. And we keep on coming back in a report card format to you with the actions we have taken and the actions we are likely to take and where we would interact with you and how we could interact with you. We'll take your suggestions on best practices. As you had seen in the original invite, we had an option to ask questions and share comments, and we have taken some of those into our presentation. So you've probably seen this slide before. I'm not going to try to explain what it really is. We as a country have generally undersold ourselves, or at least not performed to the degree that we believe we can. The same goes to this slide. When you look at the stock, we have stayed in the traditional side of FDI, whereas some other markets who happen to have very similar fundamental strengths have gone into a very different direction. Now, very recently, as you probably know, Be Ready Index, which replaces the Ease of Doing Business Index by World Bank, was published. And this is where Bangladesh sits. Again, very similar picture to what we had known before and what we had come across personally in real life. So how do we tackle this? How do we solve this problem? So we firmly believe that the most crucial factor in attracting foreign direct investment or attracting investors to invest in Bangladesh, whether it's foreign or local, is by making sure the current investors are well looked after. So we're calling it the project ambassador. And in my last two and a half weeks of job, I have met roughly about 235 CEOs, consultants, and entrepreneurs, mentors. And thanks to all of you for your ideas, suggestions on and specifying the challenges that you have faced in the last few years. So we've bucketed them down in these 5 areas. These are the core areas of concern from our investors. They probably don't need explanation in most cases. When we say lack of consultation, that happens in both incoming and for both existing investor buckets. So for incoming investors, it's about knowing who should be their first point of contact, not getting lost in the governmental alleys. For existing investors, it's more about us listening. When I say us, the government of Bangladesh, listening to the challenges that you're facing and actually be open to a continuous dialogue. Access to resources is a very common point that I hear. Policy continuity refers to situations where we chop and change our policies and procedures, which makes a financial model completely go out of the window. And then finally, corruption is a common theme. I think we rank currently 149th out of 180 countries. So surely we have a long way to go. So how do we resolve this? We've taken it into sort of 2 major spaces. We've tried to split it into 2 groups. One group where we have high impact quick wins, and in the other group, we have some longer term views. So I'll show you some of the high impact quick wins that we have been able to achieve, and we are almost there in that sense. So let's look at economic performance. And to be honest, I have a lot of respect for our central bank governor, and I should not be taking credit for what has happened in the economic performance turnaround, or at least baseline setting. So as you probably know, the exchange rate has fairly flattened out. We do expect a natural slide, but we do not expect a cliff edge drop like we have seen before in the last 24 months. Inflation has finally seen its way down. So you will probably see month-over-month inflation now in September and October looking better than what it was before. We, as a government, have paid back quite a bit of arrears, paid to some of our international investors. The capital account for the first time is actually positive for Bangladesh, and it hasn't happened in a very, very, very long time. There are asset recovery and banking reform commissions that are being looked at. And as you have probably seen in FT, the number that's been thrown on the table at this moment is about $17 billion that got heisted out of the country. So I'm not really sure that we're going to get the whole money back, but it is quite significant for a country of our size and stature. And therefore, we will run a process to see how far we can go in recovering some of the assets lost by the country. And then following up on that, I think a lot of our investors, private equity firms, and thank you for your advice and suggestions again, I think we've a long way to go in repatriation and fixing our bankruptcy law. We'll come to that in a minute. The second point, where lack of consultation has been a massive issue for both inbound and the existing investors. What we're trying to do is we're trying to reform the government into a relationship-based model. So the idea is the investor lands at the airport and you have a single point of contact for the investor throughout his journey. That single point of contact walks you through the alleys of the government, takes you to the right ministry, helps you register and get the licenses to do business in Bangladesh. We are hiring specialists from private sector and looking at exchange programs with the private sector companies. We've actually just hired the head of business development this afternoon for BIDA, which I'm very excited about. We're setting up a separate research team that will help the incoming investors and also the government of Bangladesh to be able to take right decisions around sector focus and the right policies for incentive programs. And then finally, we are actually about to launch an investment advisory board that will sit on top of the government machinery, will help, and you've seen probably this in many other countries, they will help us understand which direction we should be heading to ensure continuity of foreign direct investment.
গুড লাক পেনের সফট অয়েল বেসড ইঙ্ক দেয় নিখুঁত লেখার আত্মবিশ্বাস।
Good luck pen. Make your luck.
Lutfi Bhai will probably talk a bit more about steering committee, so I'm not going to steal his thunder and leave it there for now. But we've also recently seen some intention from the government and a cross-ministerial intention to come up with strategies. So one great example is we had this morning a conversation in the shipping ministry about national port strategy so that we can clearly define our incoming investors. Where do we intend to set the port and infrastructure in our country in next 10, 15, 20, 50 years? And how does that fit into their investment ambitions? For access to resources, we have taken a step back and tried to understand how far we can really go as a country and what can we serve. We don't want to provide false promises, and therefore we will be optimizing our delivery and we will be focusing on pace of execution. So when you look at the economic zones, we have historically said and promised many of them, but we haven't given a very clear timeline on when these zones are going to be live. Our plan now is to give a very clear Gantt chart for all the investors who can look at it and understand if they go to economic zone X, this is when they expect to receive utility supply for their factory. NBR has been very kind, and we are opening up a concept called authorized economic operator. It's essentially green channel for transportation of goods and services. It's a fantastic idea which will hopefully minimize a lot of challenges at the ports in the supply chain network and logistics, which has been a key pain point for our investors. Supposedly, and I'm very confident they will make it happen, it should be live from 1st of January 2025. And then finally, power supply has been an issue, and Power Ministry has thankfully also accepted an idea of potentially allowing captive power where power supply is not really as uninterruptive as the factories would like them to be. And finally, the last point I would touch is our initiative on corruption. So the first one, again, we are looking at a national single window, which is going to be live in first quarter of 2025. This essentially takes out everything related to the port billing process. So everything goes into online system, which takes out human interaction, takes out the time and effort you would have to go through if you were to use manual processes to process your goods and supply. Again, we genuinely believe that digitizing the whole public infrastructure will eventually take us to a point like many other countries where the process is much more efficient and is free of rent-seeking behavior. And for that, we're also opening up a team which is looking at the overall customer journey, as Lutfi Bhai has mentioned, and looking at that and thinking, how do we set up digital public infrastructure so that the heavy interaction points are completely digitized and you're out of human interaction? So these are foundational improvements that we know are there, quick wins, high impact. At the same time, in parallel, we do intend to continue to drive solutions for the key challenges, but also create a benchmark through disaggregation of sources. So what we have now is a lot of mini pots where initiatives are taken, but they don't necessarily talk to each other, and they don't give a full architectural view of what's going on. Our plan is to bring it to that level and then genuinely have a very clear idea of how are we going to look at, starting from data, how are we going to ensure data security? What is our genuine quantifiable benchmark? And how do we take it from where we are to where we should be? And as part of this whole structure or whole initiative, we are also planning to initiate a new citizen charter through consultation with investors, partners, political parties, and members of the public. We will come to you with a draft at some point and take your thoughts on how do you, or maybe let's put it this way, in a very simpler way, what is the picture of success? And we will take it from there and try to unlock the challenges that would stop us from going there. So overall, I think the message to the entire community from Investment Development Authority or / the Investment Promotion Agencies for Bangladesh, and one of my good friends have finally said that my current job is to be the Chief Marketing Officer for Bangladesh. As that, my promise would be that we will be working really hard to remove barriers and facilitate business in a very fair and transparent manner. I'm very sure that the investor community, the NRBs, our partners are very, very intelligent. They know exactly what to do. All we need to do is to remove the barriers and let them play the way they should be allowed to. So I'll stop here and maybe we will jump into taking questions for Lutfi Bhai. We've received tons of questions today, so we will try to cover at least a few of them and try to answer the rest of them via email at a later time.
Good Luck Pen সফট অয়েল বেসড ইঙ্ক দেয় নিখুঁত লেখার আত্মবিশ্বাস।
Good luck, Ben. Make your luck.
So let me maybe first jump into we call a tough question, Lutfi.
Okay.
There is a lot of question mark around this technocrat government, and I have heard this personally. I'm sure you have too. The sort of the way to frame the question is, are we really pro-business government?
Okay. I'll tell you the answer and then I'll try and explain it. So yes, we are, and we must be. At a macroeconomic level, it's a reality that we run twin deficits. We have an external imbalance and we have an internal budgetary imbalance. And those two will probably remain for some time. And for each one of them, we have a statistic of shame attached to that. With the external account, our FDI to GDP ratio is one of the lowest compared to any comparables. And on the domestic account, our tax revenue to GDP is one of the lowest compared to any peer group that you may want to come with. And neither of these two can be addressed by printing money. So the only way is you will need investments in that space, both local and foreign investments. So investments are an imperative. Also, we talk about economic fundamentals, which have been and remain strong in Bangladesh, but they do not translate into investment outcomes. And so we need to really redouble our efforts to make that translation, that execution occur. In terms of the government right now, so I don't know if very many people realize just how unusual it is for someone like me and my profile to be in my role in government, but even more unusual for someone like you to be in your role in government as beta chair. And I don't mean the Guinness World Record. I mean the private sector experience, the fact that you've experienced this ecosystem from the other side of the table, having interacted with people who are now your counterparts in Singapore, Indonesia, etc. And I think it's a statement, the fact that we arrived less than 2 months into the life of this government, of the seriousness with which the government looks at this space. Now, we're also very mindful of the concept of ease of doing business. And most of the time, people talk about ease of doing business by business. But actually, there's also a big part of that, which is the lack of ease of doing business inside of government. There are some excellent bureaucrats, long-standing civil servants, who want to do the right thing, but they're constrained by their ability to do business because of the way things operate within. And a good part of our role is to make sure that the rules of business within government are made easier for government to function better, so that there isn't as much of a systems loss that we currently have in just the way that various parts of government interact with each other. To give you an example, your authority, BIDA, and the other authorities, there's a private public partnership authority, there's an ICT authority, there is BESA and BEPSA. Well, with BESA, we bundled it into BIDA very quickly on day 2 because we felt that was an obvious thing to do. You guys are in the same building and a lot of overlapping functions, so why not? But with the others, and not just the zones I mentioned, but also, for example, Chittagong Port Authority, the people who deal with energy, with shipping, there actually wasn't a coming together of these authorities at the same time. So yesterday, we convened, and the chief advisor invited all of them to come under the same roof, and we convened on how all of these authorities, parts of government that are doing related work of investment, promotion, and facilitation are joined up. They follow best practice, they learn from each other's experiences, they make sure that an investor is handed over from one to the other in the most seamless possible way. They share some of their frustrations with other parts of government, and then they combine forces if necessary to do that. And I was surprised to learn that not only had they not met together as a group, some of them had not met, their governing boards had never met in the lifetime of these authorities. It's been, it looks like it hasn't been as systematic as it could have been. So ease of doing business within government in a non-hierarchical manner, going back to the 2 principles I mentioned at the start, due process and customer journey, is something that clearly we believe in and we are effecting on. Listening journey, you mentioned your 200 meetings. I've been here a little bit longer. I look at my stash of business cards, huge number of people that we are listening from. On my US trip, I think we were there for 4 days and we had at least 4 group sessions with various groups of investors and NRBs that we wanted to listen from. We mentioned the Investment Advisory Council you're putting together. We'll probably have an economic engagement forum. So lots of ways for businesses to interact with us. So we're definitely pro-business, but I do want to put an important caveat to that. And that is that it has to be responsible business. We will not do business with the suppression of rights, human rights, labor rights, or suppression of standards. I'm off to the ILO in a few days' time. Our delegation will be headed by Dr. Asif Nazrul, the law advisor, and we'll make a very clear statement of commitment that we will follow through on the ILO conventions that we are signatories to, but for which there are outstanding complaints that we do not implement them. So we've been engaging with stakeholders around the table, and we have come up with our proposition, and we'll be going there and making that statement. And frankly, most businesses agree. Since the tragic Rana Plaza incident, standards in many factories have improved. We have a very large number of green, sustainable factories. So actually, it's not at odds with what businesses want anyway. But we will seize the agenda when it comes to responsible business. And we will then take that agenda to the global brands so that they come with us and make sure that they are valuing those improvements in standards. So yes, we are pro-business.
Thank you. But if you are pro-business, then how or how are you solving the short-term teething problems that the businesses are facing since the government has changed? And for example, I have heard tons of concerns about law and order, and the list could go on.
Good luck পেনের সফট অয়েল বেসড ইঙ্ক দেয় নিখুঁত লেখার আত্মবিশ্বাস
Good luck pen. Make your luck.
That's right. I was looking at the Q&A, the questions coming in. There's energy, there's tax, there is law and order for sure. So first of all, solving key issues. I don't think we're near solving any of those in a way that I can be confident to say we've drawn a line underneath them. But we have an approach to solving these key issues that I feel quite confident about. And the general approach is you've got to establish a baseline. What's going on right now? What is the context in which it's happening? Recognize the systemic parts that contribute to the whole, but isolate each driver one by one, and then deal with each one of them factually. And I'll give you a concrete example with regards to the RMG sector, for example. But this is true for, in energy, for example. Dr. Fazal Kabir Khan, for example, the energy advisor, he will look at it methodically as there is an immediate supply and demand gap, a mismatch. How do you deal with that tactically? And then there is a medium to long-term question of what is the optimum mix of energy, including renewables, that need to be put in there. When it comes to tax, Dr. Salahuddin Ahmed has he's just separated organizationally the division that looks at tax policy and the division that looks at tax administration, so that you don't have a conflict of interest between the two. The NVR chair, who is an incredible, dynamic, forward-looking gentleman. His orientation is one of how can I facilitate, how can I digitize, how can I inject some certainty so that taxes are not changed during the life of an investment post-fact. So those are the approaches. For the ready-made garments sector, where we've had unrests, and it's probably the crucible where you had many of these things come together at the same time. 85% of exports is ready-made garments. It's a huge sector for us. We're not only pro-business, we value that sector. And it required a multi-pronged approach of isolating the issues, as I just mentioned to you, and teamwork amongst the advisors. So at its core, there needed to be a renegotiation of the basic agreement between workers and employers. In many cases, the relationship between the two and the way conflict was resolved was not right and not durable. So 4 advisors worked on an 18-point agreement that has been signed on to now by the employers and employee groups in this sector. And the 18-point agreement is the basis on which certain steps are going to be taken and the basis on which future conflict should be resolved. So that's the centerpiece. Then you have a law and order situation. And again, there were real issues, but also there were issues based on impressions or based on facts from a week ago, as opposed to what's going on now. So we wanted to inject a very facts, data-driven look on the law and order control room. So again, a couple of us look at the control room and the stats, which factories are shut, which are not, where the issues are, where there are non-payment of wages on a factual manner, and deal with them one by one. Then you have a small number of factories that have financial difficulties and or are unable to pay wages. Again, a limited number of them. You can look at them in isolation. If there is a requirement for liquidity assistance, we can look at those. If there is a requirement to look at the other corporate restructuring, we can look at those as well. And then finally, the bit about global buyers. I and many others have been speaking to the global buyers to make sure that they're reassured. And again, when we make sweeping comments about buyers are taking orders away from here and removing them elsewhere, they have to be based on facts and they have to be based on a sense of proportionality. So we're looking at that as well. So these are the ways you isolate and you block and tackle, and then you monitor, you learn from mistakes, you learn from lessons, and then you course correct as you go along. So that is the approach that we're taking to these key issues. I wouldn't say we have resolved these key issues yet.
Good luck পেনের সফট অয়েল বেসড ইঙ্ক দেয় নিখুঁত লেখার আত্মবিশ্বাস।
Good luck pen. Make your luck.
Right, thank you. We were talking about it this afternoon, and if surprisingly it came up, or unsurprisingly it came up in the questions. Given your background in Singapore and your understanding of the economic growth journey that Singapore has gone through, what kind of initiatives, or do you plan to implement initiatives that Singapore has done, and especially in this investment promotion space, to support and strengthen Bangladesh's business ecosystem?
Right. Well, it's probably a question for both of us, but I'll start. Firstly, I'm under no illusion that you can transplant the success of specific actions taken in one country wholesale and just plant it in a country like Bangladesh. A lot of these things are contextual. You need indigenous solutions, but there are some pointers that I think we should be wary of. The Singapore government, the governance, particularly the early days when they lost the British military base, which was an employer of 1 in every 5 Singaporean. They just upped and left. And the Singapore economy had nothing in terms of natural resources. They had to rely on foreign investments coming in, and they literally, civil servants picked up the phone and they were cold calling, begging and pleading foreign investors to come and place their operations there. I think National Semiconductor was the first one. They managed to get the CEO to visit, and famously between the first date of visit and 3 months from that date, the factory was in construction. And then they do copycats, they go around and get others to come and do the same. They've moved on now from getting factories to locate here. They're now focused on Taylor Swift coming to Singapore. And as you know, Taylor Swift's concerts this year generated so much money for the economy, Singapore had to upgrade its national GDP projection because of that. But again, whether it's Taylor Swift, whether it's AstraZeneca bringing its factory in, another event this year, they were done by a government service that is based on 3 mantras: look ahead, look across, and look again. So they look ahead to see where are the turns, where are the corners, how can we get the businesses of the future? Look across, meaning what is it that others are doing so that we're not reinventing the wheel and we're taking the best of those. And then look again is maybe we turned something down last year, but maybe the context has changed. Can we keep an open mind and continue with that going forward? Time-bound execution is hugely important. We have foreign investors, potential reputable investors here right now in our system who have been stuck there for 7 or 8 years. They don't know what's going on. Are we going to carry on with that engagement or not? And if so, when? So that relationship management in a time-bound manner is important. We need consistency of ownership across the authorities, across the time, the touch points. And then you mentioned digitalization. I would add to that we also need to reverse what seems to be certain instances of remanualization. So there have been digitalization efforts which have over time been shut down or reversed for whatever reasons that we can speculate on, but they need to be turned back on. So quite a few things that we need, and I think we can get done by looking at others.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a sneaky feeling that one of the Taylor Swift tickets had your name on it, but I will leave it there. So moving on to the next question. Again, a great question, I think. There's a lot of interest from NRBs at this moment, from all across the world. How does the government plan to engage and facilitate NRBs?
NRBs, that's my favorite topic. And but I've got to start with an apology. I'll start with an apology, and I'll start with extreme gratitude. Apology because, as you mentioned, there's just been an incredible amount, volume, quantity, quality of ideas and instances of outreach coming our way. We're overwhelmed by the offers of support from everywhere, some amazing ideas, but also, frankly, some amazing stories of action. NRBs having self-organized and gone and done things to help and assist with the reform journey that we've just started on. So my apology that it's just not been physically possible for me to respond to many of them. It might feel thankless, but I want you to rest assured that there are many cases I've received the feedback. I have passed it on to whether to the relevant advisors, or, as you know, Ashik, in many cases, there was one particular detailed note we received on Saturday. We met up and we rolled up our sleeves and we've assigned tasks to various people amongst us to deal with them. So they are being shared, they're being implemented. Please bear with us. It is energizing interacting with NRBs. As I mentioned, I met with many on the US trip. I've done other webinars, and this one is another tremendous opportunity. And I hope to do more. I do want there to be a more structured diaspora management process, like a proper community management approach where you can categorize by themes and interests, and look at ways in the way other diaspora, the Irish diaspora, organize themselves, for example. So We need a bit of time to figure that out. But in the meantime, I would put it to you that actually NRBs will probably generate better ideas than we do on how to get this done. And so my invitation to everyone is, please have a think yourselves on perhaps how you may want to structure diaspora engagement, and then come to us and say that this is what we're doing, and either you, government, get out of the way, or you, government, can you assist us with these specific things? And that approach would certainly be very welcome. At the moment, I appreciate that demand exceeds supply for NRB engagement, and I really hope we can do better.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Now, moving on to a very popular topic, and we've got quite a few questions about that, and I'm just going to club them together because otherwise I think we're just going to stay up all night today trying to answer these questions. How can we make the start of investment or a startup ecosystem easier in Bangladesh? It has been challenging and tough for a lot of startup entrepreneurs.
Right. Well, again, the general approach is the same that I mentioned, which is let's take stock of what the situation is. Let's look at the drivers in isolation and try and tackle them one at a time. The approach is one from the angle of skills and jobs. Technology, skills, and jobs. We need as many of those as possible. It isn't necessarily the approach of unicorns. It's genuine value add to the real economy. And look, there's no conflict between the two, so I'm not creating a false binary, but there is an imperative for us to generate jobs, facilitate jobs, and by jobs I mean also enterprise. One of the iconic tragic moments during the student revolts was the death of Mugdha. He was a software service provider, perfect rating on the platform that used to provide that on. His twin brother does exactly the same. Again, perfect rating. And I know people like him, people like them, they would like there to be better payments options, cross-border payments, cross-border movement of capital. There we need interactions with Bangladesh Bank. And again, we have great partners in Bangladesh Bank. We have a great partner in NBR. So we should be able to look at those in that manner. I confess, and I know the ICT advisor is looking at this root and branch, and I confess I haven't had a chance to look at it in detail myself, but I think it's this weekend that I've been invited by leaders of that sector to come up and complete that part of the listening exercise. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
Right. Thank you. I think we've just hit the end of mark in terms of time, and unfortunately we've just done half century in the number of questions we've received in last 45 minutes. What we will do is we will actually write the answers back to the attendees. Unfortunately, as I said, if we stay on, I think there will probably be another 50 questions, and thank you for those questions. This is exactly why we tried to set this thing up, and we're going to come back every month, be accountable. Reminds me of my result day in boarding school, but we will come back and try to explain to you what are we doing, why are we doing what we're doing, and also continue to take your questions. And in between, as the questions come through, we will actually try to answer them in the next 2-3 days. So please, if you can, if you're willing to, please leave your email to our Q&A session, and we'll get back to you soon. But thank you very much. Thanks, Lutfi. Thanks very much for joining us in the very first session, and hopefully see you soon. And all the best to your trip for ILO convention.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Good night all.
গুড লাক পেনের সফট অয়েল বেসড ইঙ্ক দেয় নিখুঁত লেখার আত্মবিশ্বাস।
Good luck pen.
Make your luck.